Hey guys, welcome back! If you thought that in the 80s the video game industry was kind of boring, well, think again. Let's travel back to 1987 and examine in detail the incredible story behind the development of Barbarian The Ultimate Warrior. Let's take a look. The 80s was a huge incubator, a place to try new things and bring those to the masses. The home computer market was where people would express themselves artistically. Sometimes the thin line of controversy was crossed and many were shocked and others amazed. Paradise Cafe and Game Over were two examples of controversy back in mid-80s that started to wake a few people to the freedom of home computing and programming. In those days, video games were seen as something for kids, and when covers like these started to pop out in stores, it was kind of obvious that our young eyes would totally engrave those in the back of our innocent minds. Palace Software wasn't a particularly popular name in the business around that time. It all started as a popular video store in London, owned by the Palace Group that soon expanded into the video game business, selling games within the video store and by mail order, attracting neighboring young kids that would rush into the store to show their own games that they've written on their bedrooms. This was the turning point for the Video Palace store. The managers Peter Stone and Richard Leinfeldner approached Nick Powell, chief of the Palace Group, and Palace Software was born. Its first in-house developed and published game was The Evil Dead for the ZX Spectrum and Commodore 64, based on a movie from 1981 with the same name, that concerned many parents about the probable gory visuals within the game. Hey, it's the 8-bit era! How gory can this be? After the release of The Evil Dead, they realized that they would gonna need help mainly on the artistic side of things, and was when Steve Brown entered the scene. Their break came in 1985 with the game Cauldron, designed by Brown himself, and Palace's second published title, and a year later with its sequel Cauldron 2 The Pumpkin Strikes Back for the most popular 8-bit home computers. In that same year, another bomb from Palace hit the shelves, created this time around by Dan Malone, a newly acquired designer that didn't know a thing about computer games, but was a huge fan of 2000 AD comics. The Secret Armor of Antiriad was the very first title that combined backtracking and RPG elements together, and is considered by myself the very first Metroidvania game, even before that subgenre was even thought of. Feel free to check my review. Back to Cauldron and Cauldron 2, Steve Brown was the designer that ended up bringing fame to Palace Software with those two titles, so around 86 he had loose rein to do whatever he wished for his next game. Highly inspired by the amazing art style of Frank Frazetta and the 1984 movie Conan the Destroyer, Brown wrote the story of Drax, an evil sorcerer whose greatest wish is to grab once and for all and for himself the beautiful Princess Mariana. Yeah, I totally comprehend that. And the only thing that could release her from his claws is by controlling this mighty barbarian through a series of duels against the sorcerer's vassals. If we win, we get the girl. During that time, one-on-one fighting games were really starting to attract players. Karate Champ on the arcades was a huge deal back in '84, and in 1985 we saw the overwhelming receptions of Yeah R Kung Fu, Way of the Exploding Fist, and International Karate on home computers. The genre was on fire by the end of '85 and also during the following year. Needless to say that the formula would repeat itself to exhaustion, and its template would evolve into things like Street Fighter. So the video game envisioned by Steve Brown involved a lot of one-on-one fighting, single or two-player action, but with swords, Conan style. And the fighting sequences from his favorite Conan movie were what he was aiming for, like the finishing move known as Flying Neck Chop. Brown even filmed his sessions where he practiced 16 moves with a wooden sword, so that those would be used as reference for the game's animation. As for sounds, these were taken from the 1985 movie Red Sonja. Even the music is highly inspired by the amazing Basil Pelodori's original soundtrack from Conan the Barbarian. And if you thought that Mortal Kombat was violent, wait until you see heads rolling and being kicked off screen years before Midway even imagined on making a game around that subject. It wasn't the violent gameplay depicted in-game that would grab the media's attention. They were more focused on the game's cover, or should I say, a particular part of Barbarian's cover. The advertising campaign for Barbarian was what really made people gossip and spread the word. By then, video game covers and adverts were hand-drawn, usually by extremely talented and renowned artists like Alfonso Azpiri, Luis Royo, Bob Wakelin, and Roger Dean, just to name a few. But Brown wanted something more real, so he, as creative director of the whole thing, convinced his superiors to hire two models to pose for Barbarian's advertising campaign, Michael van Veek and Maria Whittaker. By that time, Michael was a bodybuilder and owned a gym in southeast London and was later known as Wolf from the TV show Gladiators that aired throughout the 90s. Nowadays he's also owner of a gym, but in New Zealand, and named after his character from the TV show. But the biggest, let's say, complaint was the presence of Maria Whittaker that started to appear by 1985 in the highly popular page 3 from the British tabloid The Sun at the age of 16. She was very professional, and getting her to do a photo shoot wasn't as pricey as they initially thought it would be, but a launch event for the game with her presence was quickly discarded. So the inclusion of a page 3 model on the cover of a video game supposedly intended for kids, combined with extreme violence depicted in-game, were two of the most explosive controversial factors to soon be arriving to video game stores in 1987. Bear in mind that this was years before PEGI and ESRB rating systems were firmly implemented. In the meanwhile, Psygnosis was about to release a platform game also entitled Barbarian, so after a couple of meetings between both publishers, Palace decided to append the subtitle The Ultimate Warrior. Just like Antiriad, Barbarian The Ultimate Warrior was also sent to the other side of the Atlantic by 1988 to be more precise, with the developers licensing the game to Epix, who published it in the United States under a different name, Death Sword, and also changing completely the box art. Needless to say that it didn't sell. In that territory, a DOS port was also available. Back in Europe, it was immediately banned in West Germany. Even so, Palace Software agreed on changing the blood to green and remove Maria Whittaker from the cover so that it would have a chance on that market. Even Crash Magazine was threatened to be pulled off the shelves by the giant W.H. Smith, compliments of Oliver Frey, and the brutal cover he'd drawn for issue 41, published in June of '87. Instead, and gladly, this particular issue was relegated to the top shelf, but even so it sold out. Newsfield Publications even had to promise to W.H. Smith not to do a similar stunt ever again. A sequel followed a year later, adopting an adventure style of gameplay in where we fight monsters and creatures while we explore the Dungeon of Drax. And taking advantage of all the fuss around the original, both Michael and Maria were brought back once again to brighten the cover for Barbarian 2. By around 1991, Barbarian 3 was already in the making, and with its marketing campaign all planned out, that would feature this time around Debbie Ashby on its cover. But in the meanwhile, the software division of the Palace Group was sold to the French publisher Titus, responsible for the Crazy Cars and Prehistoric successful series by the end of the 80s, and Barbarian 3 never saw the light of day. As you can see, the 80s was a huge jungle in where all sorts of unearthed things would constantly emerge and surface for despair of some and pleasure of many. And it's perfectly obvious that despite all the controversy, Barbarian The Ultimate Warrior was a major sales success due to its provocative cover and also for the brutal content that caught us completely off guard. In 2012, by the 25th anniversary of Barbarian The Ultimate Warrior, a Mega Drive, PC Engine and Windows clones of the 1987 game were made available by a huge fan of the original. Check the description for the link to grab this awesome piece of programming. While you're at it, check my other retro gaming related stories available on my channel and click on that bell icon so that you're notified as soon as the next video becomes available. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, comment, Patreon and subscribe to itsaPIXELthing. It will hugely help the growth of the channel and reach a wider audience. Thank you very much for watching and I'll see you all in the next episode.